Welcome back to our daily read aloud. My side of the mountain. You guys have no idea how hard it is to still not say Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. It's like stuck in here. So, we are getting really close to the end of the story. So we will see today how close we get. When we finished reading last time, Sam had a problem. Who can remember? Someone came up the mountain and there's a problem. Angie, what's happening?
There was this boy that came, and he was writing down everything he did, and he knew he was a wild boy, and then Sam said it's a lie, and then he said that he's writing that he knew that he was a wild boy, and then they were like, no.
Yeah, Sam said, no, please, Matt, don't do it. And Matt said, okay, under one condition, I won't do it. What'd he say? Noah?
He said, if you let me stay in your treehouse or wherever you live for like a week.
Yeah, I think for his spring break. He's like, you're going to let me come stay with you for a week, and I won't tell anybody. Cadence?
And most of us predicted that he'd get alive.
Yeah, we're not sure we trust Matt because he might just want a really good story. Hayden?
What page?
We are on page 156. All right, make sure our voices are off, ears are on. Those of you at home, we're getting close to the end. Here we go. So, Matt just read everything he'd written. This is the last time asking us to be quiet without losing a tally. Okay, it's more than voices. Keep yourself quiet. All right. So, no, Matt, no, I begged. I was about to wrestle it out with him when he said, I'll make a deal with you. Let me spend my spring vacation with you, and I won't print a word of it. I'll only write what you've told me. I looked at him and decided that it might be nice to have him. I said, I'll meet you outside town any day you say, providing you let me blindfold you and lead you to my home, and providing you promise not to have a lot of photographers hiding in the woods. Do you know what would happen if you told on me? Sure, the newsreels would roll up, the TV cameras would arrive, reporters would hang from the trees, and you'd be famous. Yes, and back in New York City. I'll write what you said, and not even your mother will recognize you. Make it some other town and it's a deal, I said. You might say I'm working for civil defense, doing research by learning to live off the land. Tell them not to be afraid, that crayfish are delicious and caves are warm. Matt liked that. He sat down again. Tell me some of the plants and animals you eat so that they will know what to do. We can make this informative. I sat down and listened and listed some of the better wild plants and the more easily obtainable mammals and fish. I gave him a few good recipes and told him that I didn't recommend anyone trying to live off the land unless they liked oysters and spinach. Matt liked that. He wrote and wrote. Finally, he said, my hands are cold. I'd better go. But I'll see you on April 12th at 3:30 outside of town, okay? And just to prove that I'm a man of my word, I'll bring you a copy of what I write. Well, you'd better not give me away. I have a scout in civilization who follows all these stories. We shook hands and he departed at a brisk pace. I returned to my patch on the mountain, talking to myself all the way. I talk to myself a lot, but everyone does. The human being, even in the midst of people, spends 9/10 of his time alone with the private voices in his or her own head. You ever thought about that?
Yeah.
Is most of your life spent thinking the thoughts that are in your own head?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Living alone on a mountain is not much different, except that your speaking voice gets rusty. I talked inside my head all the way home. Thinking up schemes, holding conversations with Bando and Dad and Matt Spell. I worded the article for Matt after discussing it with Bando and made it sound very convincing without giving myself up. I kind of wanted to write it down and send it to Matt, but I didn't. I entered my tree, tied Frightful to the bedpost, and there was Jesse Coon James. It had been months since I'd seen him. He was curled up on my bed, asleep. A turtle shell that had been full of cracked walnuts was empty beside him. He awoke, jumped to the floor, and walked slowly between my legs and out the door. I had the feeling that Jesse was hoping I had departed for good, and that he could have my den. He was a comfort-loving creature. I was bigger and my hands were freer than his, so he conceded me the den. I watched him climb over the Baron's rock and shinny up a hemlock. He moved heavily into the limbs, and it occurred to me that Jessie was a she Jessie, not a he Jessie. Do you think maybe she's going to have babies?
Yes.
Because she's starting to move really heavy, and we know sometimes that happens with wild animals.
And I know the hint if they're gonna have babies. If you squeeze their nipples or something, some milk.
If you have milk ready, sometimes. All right. I cooked supper and then sat down by my little fire and called a forum. It is very sociable inside my head, and I have perfected the art of getting a lot of people arguing together in silence or in a forum. And as I prefer to call it. Does he really have 4 people sitting with him arguing?
Yes.
No. What's going on in his head, Josiah?
He's just thinking about an argument. There's a TV show where that happens every once in a while.
Okay, so you got a picture. He's about to have this crazy argument. In his mind, he's got himself, he's got his dad, he's got Bando, and in his head, he makes all of them talk to each other and argue. Does this tell us that Sam's probably getting fairly lonely?
Yeah.
I would think so. Noah?
Feels so lonely because when people he's seen and it's hallucinating.
He is almost, he's having discussions with himself, with other people in his head.
I hope he's the best.
So, I don't think you can go as far to say he's kind of going crazy on the mountain.
Yeah.
But he misses talking to people, right? So you'd invent people in your brain that you could think about just so you could feel like you're being social. So this is what he's talking about here. I can get all 4 people all talking at once, and a 5th can be present, but generally I can't get him to talk. Usually these forums discuss such things as storm and whether or not it's coming, how to make a spring suit, and how to enlarge my house without destroying my life in the tree. However, tonight, they discussed what to do about Matt's spell. Dad kept telling me to go right down to the city and make sure he published nothing, not even a made-up story. Bando said, no, it's all right. He still doesn't know where you live. And then Matt walked into the conversation and said that he wanted to spend his spring vacation with me, and that he promised not to do anything untoward. Matt kept using untoward. I don't know where he got that expression, but he liked it and kept using it. That's how I knew Matt was speaking. Everything was untoward. Who was really making up Matt's lines? Zoe?
What's her name?
Sam. Yeah, Sam's making up all of this, right? So I think at this point, if I knew Sam, I would say, you need some human interaction. Does it really seem like he needs to talk to people? Noah?
What the heck is untoward mean?
I think it's a word he's just making up in his head right now. And he keeps saying it about that Matt's saying it. And he goes, I don't even know what Matt means by that word, which is starting to get confusing because he's the one making it up, right? So he's kind of maybe getting a little nuts or something, right? He's kind of losing it. Josiah?
When me and my mom are reading this, she's like, what? Why are they in his house? Why are all these people finding him? She didn't even know it was going on in his head.
Yeah, so he's having a crazy time in his head. That night, I fell asleep with all these people discussing the probability of my being found and hauled back to the city. Suddenly, Frightful broke into the conversation. She said, don't let that Matt come up here. He eats too much. That was the first time that Frightful had ever talked in a forum. I was delighted, for I was always sure that she had more to say than a few cries. She had not missed Matt's appetite. The forum dissolved in a good humor, everyone being delighted with Frightful. I lifted my head to look at her. She had her beak and her feathers of her back, sound asleep. She spoke in my head, however, and said, you really want to be found, or you would not have told Matt all that you did. I like you better when you don't talk, I said, pulling the deer hide over me, and fell into a deep sleep. Okay, before we read on, think about what all just happened. I really like that end. Okay, he pictured Frightful talking to him, and she said, we don't need that Matt spell up here. He eats too much. And then she said to him, you really want to be found. And Sam said, basically, be quiet, bird. I liked you better when you didn't talk, even though it's all in his own head. Why is he thinking these things to himself about being found and all that? Cadence?
He doesn't want to be found.
Do you think he might feel a little bit like I do and a little bit like I don't? Yeah? What do you guys think about that? Josiah?
Yes.
Yeah. Emma?
It's not really about that, but like when I was like younger,
Quinn?
I would just make up plans of people and just talk to myself.
I mean, a lot of people do this. If they say they don't, most people are lying. At least at some point in your life, you have talked to someone or some other idea in your head. Okay. I kind of like to think, I think Sam is really sad about having to return to his old life, and he wishes it wasn't quite his old life he has to return to. But I think he's ready to be around people. Anyone else kind of think that's how he's feeling? Yeah. If you're by yourself that long, it gets really hard. And today we're going to save the Beatles book for next week because I think
Not for lunch.
it's not time for lunch. But we are so close to finishing the story. All right, I'm going to keep reading. This next chapter is called I Cooperate with the Ending. By the middle of March, I could have told you it was spring without looking. Jessie did not come around anymore. She was fishing with the rewarding waters of the open stream. She was returning to a tree hollow full of babies. The bear and weasel did not come by. There were salamanders and frogs to keep him busy. The chickadees sang alone, not in a winter group, and the skunks and minks and foxes found food more abundant in the forest than at my treehouse. The circumstances that had brought us all together in the winter were no more. There was food on the land, and the snow was slipping away. By April, I was no longer living off my storehouse. There were bulbs, tubers, and greens to be had. Meals were varied once more. There were frogs' legs, eggs, and turtle soup on my table. I took my baths in the spring again, rather than in the turtle shell with warmed-over snow. I plunged regularly into the ice water of the spring, shouting as my breath was grabbed from my lungs. I scrubbed, ran for my tree, and dried myself before the fire, shouting as I stepped into my clothes. Then I would sing. I made up a lot of nice songs after my bath, one of which I taught to a man who was hiking along the top of the gorge one day. He said his name was Aaron, and he was quiet and tall. I found him sitting on the edge of the cliff, looking across the valley. He was humming little tunes. He had a sad smile that never went away. I knew I would not have to hide from him just by looking at him, so I walked up and sat down beside him. I taught him my cold water song. Hayden?
Shouting as my breath was grabbed from my lungs is a hyperbole.
Very nice. I learned he wrote songs and that he was from New York. He had come to the Catskills for the Passover festivities and had wandered off for the day. He was about to go back when I sat down and he said, I heard you humming. Yes, he said, I hum a good deal. Can you hum? Yes, I replied, I can hum. I hum a good deal too, and even sing, especially when I get out of the spring in the morning. Then I really sing loud. Let's hear you sing aloud. So I said, feeling very relaxed with the sun shining on my head. All right, I'll sing you my cold water song. I like that, Aaron said. Sing it again. So I did. Let me suggest a few changes. He changed a few words to fit the tune and the tune to fit the words, and then we both sang it. Mind if I use the hum 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 dee dee part? He asked presently. You can use it all, I said. Tunes are free up here. I got that from the red-eyed vireo, which is the little bird. He sat up and said, What other songs are sung up here? I whistled him the Hi Chickadee song of the black-capped Mr. Brackett and the waterfall song of the wood thrush. He took out a card, lined it with 5 lines, and wrote in little marks. I stretched back in the sun and hummed the song of the brown thrasher and of the barometer the nuthatch. Then I boomed out the song of the great horned owl and stopped. That's enough, isn't it? I asked. I guess so. He lay back and stretched, looked into the leaves, and said, If I do something with this, I'll come back and play it to you. I'll bring my portable organ. Fine, I said. Then after a drowsy pause, he said, "Will you be around these parts this summer?" "I'll be around," I said. Aaron fell asleep, and I rolled over in the sun. I liked him. He hadn't asked me one personal question. Oddly enough, I wasn't sure whether that made me glad or not. Then I thought of the words Frightful had spoken in my head. You want to be found. And I began to wonder. I had sought out a human being. This would not have happened a year ago. I fell asleep. When I awoke, Aaron was gone, and Frightful was circling me. She saw me stir, swooped in, and sat on a rock beside me. I said hi, but did not get up, just lay still listening to the birds, the snips and sputs of insects moving on the dry leaves, and the air stirring the newly leafing trees. Nothing went on in my head. It was comfortably blank. I knew the pleasures of the lizard on the log, who knows where his next meal is coming from. I also knew his boredom. After an hour, I did have a thought. Aaron had said that he was up in the Catskills for Passover. Then it must also be near Easter, and Matt would be coming soon. I had not counted notches in weeks. A cool shadow crossed my face, and I arose, whistled for Frightful to come to my hand, and wandered slowly home, stuffing my pockets with spring beauty bulbs as I went. Several days later, I met Matt on Route 27 at 3:30. I tied a handkerchief around his eyes and led him stumbling and tripping up the mountain. I went almost directly home. So is he even trying to hide where he lives as much anymore? He used to do those big zigzags all around, right? Now he just walked him home. I guess I didn't much care if he remembered how to get there or not. When I took off the blindfold, he looked around. "Where are we? Where's your house?" I sat down and motioned him to sit. He did so with great willingness. In fact, he flopped. "Do you sleep on the ground?" I pointed to the deerskin flaps moving in the wind and the hemlock. "What do? Live in a tree?" "Yep." Matt bounced to his feet and we went in. I propped the door open so that the light streamed in, and he shouted with joy. I lit the tallow candle and we went over everything, and each invention he viewed with a shout. While I prepared trout baked in wild grape leaves, Matt sat on the bed and told me the world news in brief. I listened with care to the trouble in Europe, the trouble in the Far East, the trouble in the South, the trouble in America. Also a few sensational murders, some ball scores, and his report card. "It all proves my point," I said sagely. "People live too close together." "Is that why you are here?" "Well, not exactly. The main reason is that I don't like to be dependent, particularly on electricity, rail, steam, oil, coal machines, and all those things that can go wrong." "Well, is that why you are up here?" "Well, not exactly. Some men climbed Mount Everest because it was there. Here is a wilderness. Is that why?" "Ah, come on, Matt. See that falcon? Hear those white-throated sparrows? Smell that skunk?" "Well, the falcon takes the sky, the white-throated sparrow takes the low bushes, the skunk takes the earth, you take the newspaper office, I take the woods." "Don't you get lonely?" "Lonely? I've hardly had a quiet moment since arriving. Stop being a reporter and let's eat. Besides, there are people in the city who are lonelier than I." And we'll probably stop there. But I have a quick question as we stop. I like that last sentence because I think it's very true. Think about it a minute. In a huge city, are there sometimes millions of people?
Yes.
Oftentimes. Now, do you think it could still be really hard to meet people, make friends, and feel like you're not alone in a sea of a million people?
Yeah.
When I'm in big cities, I kind of feel like that. I don't like the feel because there are people everywhere, but I feel so alone. So I can relate to what Sam said. So do you think if you didn't have anyone with you, would you feel lonelier in a city all by yourself or lonelier in the forest all by yourself? I'm just curious. Josiah?
City.
City? Zoe?
City.
City? Cadence?
City.
Abby?
City.
City? Hayden?
City.
Eric?
Forest.
Forest? Quentin?
City.
City. Emma? Angie? Forest. Hudson?
City.
We kind of a good arrangement. Just kind of depends on your type of person, right? I would definitely be lonelier in a city. If I didn't know anyone, then I would feel in the woods. That's just how I feel. All right. Thank you all for joining me today. We will finish the story next time we read.